More specifically, they had what we call otitis externa. So otitis, the term otitis makes reference to an ear infection, and the term externa makes reference to the location of this infection in relation to the ear. So externa is the outer ear, so the outer ear canal and the outermost layer of the membrane. And as part of the otitis externa, they've got a lot of edema or inflammation or swelling of the outer part of the ear canal, so the cartilaginous portion. And as a result, it's very difficult to get access into this patient's ear. Currently, I'm using a fine-end suction probe, and even a fine-end suction probe is just managing to fit inside the swollen ear canal. However, with the fine-end suction probe, there's not enough suction power because of its narrow tip, and also it's getting blocked up with the patient's earwax. So I'm having to use a full-size Zollner suction probe, and the way I'm managing to insert it into the ear, despite the swelling, is I'm using the endoscope to stretch the ear open to gain access. And you can see I'm really having to stretch this open, and even then, the suction probe is just about fitting into the ear. Now, the bony part of the ear canal, so the inner 2/3, that's not swollen. So once you get through the swelling, the ear canal does widen a bit, which does make the case a bit more tricky as well, because the plug of wax that's medially impacted into the ear, it's larger than the swelling of the ear canal. So we're having to pull through a large piece of wax through a narrow entrance. And what makes the procedure even more tricky is the consistency of this wax. It's very mushy and cloggy, and therefore it's very hard to get a good suction grip without the suction probe getting blocked. Think about it like wet mud or mashed potato or wet clay. It's got that type of really stodgy consistency, and therefore, not at the moment, but in a moment, you will see that I'm going to use some drops. So not immediately, I'm going to just go back in and see if I can loosen a bit of the wax off the canal walls. Now, you may have noticed then initially when I inserted the endoscope into the ear that there was a bit of fogging, a bit of misting, and that's another sign, another hallmark that the patient's got a bit of an ear infection. So whenever someone's got an ear infection, they've got a raised temperature in the ear, so the ear temperature is a bit higher than it should be, so above 36.9 degrees centigrade, which then causes the hot air in the ear to condense on the colder lens of the endoscope, and that's where we get a misting, a bit of fogging, a bit of condensation. But with an endoscope, we've got optical fibres running all the way around the edge of the endoscope, and that evenly distributes heat from the light source, which is being illuminating inside the ear, which then very quickly heats up the lens of the endoscope, which then causes the hot air that's condensed and to evaporate, and then it demists itself very quickly. So you can see this wax is very immediately impacted. There's no way this is going to come out naturally, especially because of the patient's otitis externa. So I've just put some drops in. You can just see how narrow that patient's ear is. It's virtually shut. Without me stretching the ear open, the ear canal is absolutely concealed. It's completely closed and swollen. So I'm just mopping up some of the excess oil, and then I'm going to go back in a moment, and I'm going to stretch the ear open. And then I'm just going to slowly insert a suction probe into the wax. I'm trying to go for the core of the wax, and the reason for that is at this stage I was not too sure whether I'll be able to remove this because of the patient's swelling. And what I wanted to do, if possible, is just to get through the core of the wax in the middle and create a little hole in the wax so sound can get through. So if nothing else, the patient hopefully will be able to leave the clinic today just being able to hear a bit better. At one stage I was thinking that I would need to get the patient to visit their GP after we refer them to get this swelling down, and once the swelling's down I'll be able to go in and get the wax out. And sometimes, so our main objective as a clinical ear care specialist is to alleviate the patient of their symptoms, and for this patient they had oral fullness, of pressure in the ear, a bit of earache, and also of course reduced hearing. In fact, they couldn't hear the suction machine, which is right behind them upon attending today. So sometimes just trying to create a little hole in the middle of the wax is actually good enough in the short term. until the patient can get their ear treated, and we can then get them back in and successfully treat their ear. Now, I must admit, it's very seldom that nowadays I need to get people back. I think in the course of the last year, probably 2 patients, top of my head, that I've had to get back on a second visit, and one of those was a child that we needed to definitely, the earwax was really hard and we had to put some drops in. But I thought this would be the third, but you can see there, and if you can see in the middle, there's a little gap there, hole through the wax, and that's already at this stage, the patient could hear significantly better. So that's objective 1 achieved, and I decided to put some more drops in now, because the drops can then penetrate through that hole and lubricate the underside of the ear canal and the eardrum. And you can see what's happened then is that this wax was really, really binded together, and it came out in a big, big lump. And once I've removed that, you can see the patient's eardrum, it's nice and healthy. You've got a light reflex there. So there is some wet residual wax coating the canal wall. Now, is that significant? Is it going to affect their hearing? No. Is it going to cause any symptoms? No. And if I was training my clear wax delegates at this stage, I'd look, just leave it like this. And only when you get a bit more experienced and skills, if the patient's comfortable and you feel confident, you can kind of go in mop up as much as possible. And I was just hovering over that wet wax, but it wasn't coming. And the reason why I stopped is I thought it's not significant enough. But also the patient at that stage was also experiencing the caloric effect. Sometimes when you vacuum the ear and you perform microsuction, it reduces the ear temperature, which then inhibits the organ of balance in that particular ear, which then leads to reduced signals being sent from the organ of balance in that ear to the brain, which then tricks your brain into thinking you're moving the opposite direction, but of course you're not. The patient's stationary, but because they're receiving less signals, because of the reduced temperature, which inhibits the organ of balance, it tricks the brain thinks it's moving, and because you're not moving, you then suffer from vertigo, your eyes spin, and the room spins around, and it settles after about 30 seconds to 60 seconds until the ear temperature kind of comes back to the norm. Temporarily, I also ask people to fixate on their finger, so we get the patient to put their finger in front of their eyes and get them to look at the finger, and that just helps refocus the eyes as well, so they're not spinning around, and it just helps settle their caloric effect. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. Well, just before I sign off, so yes, we have written to the patient's GP. We've recommended some antibiotic spray for the otitis externa, but nonetheless, the patients can hear significantly. But in fact, they can hear back normally again despite the swelling. We've discussed strict water precautions. Water can exacerbate it can not only cause an infection, but it can also exacerbate any current infection. So we've explained just to avoid water in the ear, so we don't want to exacerbate their otitis externa. Well, I'm going to sign off now, so I hope you're all keeping well. This is actually my second voiceover. The first one, I didn't realise that I had I'm doing this narration from home, and I had the TV on in the background, and although it was at a low volume, it was audible when I listened to it back. So I decided to just re-record the audio